Temitope, thank you for joining us today. So it's been quite an interesting year for the market. We had a couple of highlights during the year. We had MTN's listing. It's had the good, the bad, and the ugly. But let's just take stock, perhaps right from November up until now. November wasn't a bad month for the NSE, but now what market analysts keep telling me is that, look, Esther, if you just look across the board, especially in the banking, even the consumer goods sector, which hasn't done so well this year, there are still very good bargains, very good value, in terms of re-entry points and even, dividend yield, etc. But it doesn't look like investors are taking that up. What is your theory?
First of all, the way I like to categorize the investors, so we have the institutional investors and we have the domestic investors. We've seen that this year, the institutional investors, and especially in the foreign portfolio investors, they've exited the market starting from pre-election, the election period, and even afterwards. And because of the macroeconomic environment, so to speak, and then you see that policy uncertainties and a lot of activities around the market. So they were not particularly sure of the direction the economy was going, and that negatively affected their sentiment, and then a lot of them had to exit. And then even though you see that globally interest rates beginning to decline, and then you'd expect that, there will be an influx into this market, but we are not seeing as much influx into the market. And like I mentioned, because of the policy uncertainties. So if you look at institutional investors, at some point in the year, they increased their allocation into the market, which was the period where we saw a rally in the markets, yes. And then that has sort of fizzled out. Like I said, it wasn't sustainable. It was. I mean, you need a catalyst for the market to sustain.
Sorry to butt in here. I'm just wondering, because what are other options do investors have? We have all that. Lower. If you just look at the rates, 1-year treasuries, for instance. It obviously rates lower than what you get on some stocks, high dividend yielding stocks in the market. What other options do investors have? Are they willing to stay put with lower rates, lower than inflation, lower than the MPR, lower than what they will get on some stocks?
I think an issue is information. Yes, so I believe it's an issue of information. So, like I mentioned, the market is dominated. The local market is dominated by institutional investors, not as much as individual investors. And then even a lot of these investors, they still have this investment banks yeah, exactly. So if there is that information that and I think people have this collection bias of what happened the last time in the equities market when the equities market crashed, and there's a lot of trust issues from the individual.
Well, we're still talking, and it's funny that we're still talking confidence issues. The NSE on its part has done a lot of, done a lot to help foster confidence, transparency, finding companies who, in terms of...
Yes, I believe there's going to be a lag before, people will gradually warm up to it. Because like you mentioned, there are stocks that have actually done well. And then you have the likes of Axis Bank has gained over 40% year to date. And then you have other stocks like that. Lafarge has gained over 40% year to date. So if you look within the market, there are stocks that have done incredibly well this year, but not generally across the sectors.
So what are we to look forward to next year? I'm just wondering because, at a point, it seemed like, with the changes at the money market, fixed income market, we was going into this new era where we're going to see more investors coming into the market, mostly because it, didn't have a choice, as it were. But it looks like that's not happening. So I'm just wondering, what is your outlook for 2020?
I think it's going to improve because, like you mentioned, the rates are quite low now, and then people are beginning to ask, so where do I put my money? Where do I put my money? And even though they're still a bit reluctant to go into the equities market, so it's about information and trying to make them understand what exactly the market is about. And I think NSE has done a lot to improve on investors' confidence and then stability in the market. So I believe with time, people will begin to warm up to it, and then I believe that the market will do relatively well compared to this year.
And for the foreign investors, because also talking to market analysts, they tell me that, look, foreign investors look to the local investors to come into the market, then they step in. Even though we usually see the opposite, local investors waiting for foreign investors to come into the market. It's quite interesting how these dynamics play out at the market. But looking across sectors for you, in terms of for those who are thinking about going into the market, what are those sectors or stocks that present good?
Yeah, we're still playing the financial services and the banking space because despite the issues around the banking with the regulatory risk and all of that, and then recently I think the recent downgrade sort of affected the market as well, because I mean they downgraded the banks, they downgraded the Nigerian economy, which would affect. These are the kind of indicators the foreign investors look at when they want to go into the market. So if they're saying there's a downgrade in the Nigerian economy, and then they'll sort of be pessimistic about going into that market. But in terms of what other sectors, so yeah, definitely the banking space, even though it was downgraded, we believe there's still value in it, and we expect InterSwitch to list next year. Hopefully, if they list in the Nigerian market, that should sort of boost, because I mean that sector is really growing. And then if you look at the telecom and ICT space, they've been one of the sectors that have been growing like double digits in the last 4-5 quarters. Yeah, so there's a lot of opportunity in that space as well.
Temitope, thank you for talking to us today. Pleasure having you on the show.
Me.
Temitope Jolaoso, analyst at FDC, taking us through the stock market here in Nigeria.